So I'm here today with Austin RiisDue, who is a PhD candidate at Waterloo. Tell us how you came to be a PhD candidate and even more, a Hickman Scholar.
But it's a pleasure to get to have a conversation with you today, and I appreciate you taking the time. And it all started out with I was back in high school, and I had mentioned this fella to you that I was the best man in his wedding. He went down to A&M, and he was a year above me in school, and he used to come back all the time to visit this girlfriend of his that was back in the small town where we're from. And he said, "Well, I heard from the math club this thing about actuarial science." And I'm still in high school at the time, but we started looking into it and we decided, well, why don't we just go do one of these things and try it out? And so we signed up on coaching actuaries and taught ourselves. I'd never taken a probability class. I hadn't even finished all of calculus yet because the little high school in the town that we're from don't have all of that kind of stuff. And so we taught ourselves and we went and we passed. And I got kind of hooked on the idea of being an actuary. And I wound up down at the University of Texas, and they have a pretty good actuarial science program down there. And I went in to go see the director of the department down there, Mark Maxwell. And he said, "Now, how'd you manage to pass P without ever taking a college class?" And I explained my story to him. And he said, "Well, you might start thinking about maybe instead of going into industry, doing grad school while you're here, think about it." And I came to him in my third year, and this was, I mean, COVID had hit in the meantime, and I'd gone home and I'd had nothing better to do besides hang out with my parents, hang out with my puppy dogs, and take actuarial exams. So I had 7 tests under my belt after 3 years of college. And I went back up to Mark and I said, "Well, do you think I ought to do that master's degree?" And he said, "Boy, you're too far along for a master's degree now with all these exams you got." He said, "You need to apply to a doctorate, and the best that you can get for actuarial science is the University of Waterloo. So go ahead and apply there and cross your fingers and hope you get in." And so I applied for direct admission to the PhD, and David Landry all liked my story, and he invited me up here to do the PhD. And then Ben Lee, I took a class with him, and he decided that he wanted to come on and co-supervise me. He liked hanging around with me so much, and so we've just had a blast up here ever since. But I mean, I thank God every day that this all really worked out the way that it did. But that's kind of how we wound up here. Really, it started with Mark Maxwell, and it started with my buddy coming home and us deciding to take that exam back in high school.
Well, congratulations for doing that. That's a remarkable
Well,
history.
thanks.
But what I see as a professor in another teaching and a research university is our PhD candidates are almost invariably international. It's very
Hmm.
rare that an American student moves on to the PhD. Do you ever thought about why that is, or how we can encourage more research amongst actuaries? Because actuaries are just not good at pursuing research.
Well, and that's something that I mean, you see that with engineering, right? Where the things that get published are the things that are being put into practice, and invariably it ends up being the things that are taught in coursework, right? Are these innovations that are done in research, and that's something that actuaries have kind of failed at, is not being able to actually pick up on what's going on in the research community, or maybe on the other hand, the research community has kind of failed at addressing the problems of industry. And either which way you want to phrase it, there's a cliff there, and that's something that is, I mean, in a way, the college teaching has to kind of catch up too at the undergraduate level to allow these students to look at these research materials, because a lot of this stuff nowadays, a lot of the actuarial publications have gotten into really, really complex math that you really need an advanced degree to be able to understand. And so, I mean, I would have been totally intimidated if you came to me when I was a sophomore at University of Texas and said, "Hey, what do you think about this article out of JRI?" There wouldn't have been a way for me to interpret what was going on there, because the math that's being used in research is completely disconnected from the math that's used every day and the math that's taught in the coursework. Once you get to that level, right? And so I think that that's one thing, is you really need. I got lucky. I had kind of a mentor down at the University of Texas, Malika Kadena, and her husband Gordon Zukovich, that's a famous financial mathematician, right? They both really helped me to understand a lot of higher level math that I needed to know in order to get into doing research and get more interested in that. But not everybody has that, right? And so that's something that was a difference maker for me. But in general, a lot of the students that take actuarial coursework are not taking the advanced level math that they need to in order to understand what's being done in the research field.
Do you think that that has something to do with the way we structure the exams? Because a lot of actuarial courses focus on the actuarial exams, and the actuarial exams, for the most part, are not really that math heavy. Um,
Hmm.
so the students and the coursework that they do is really full of preparation for those exams. There isn't a lot of room. I don't think there's a lot of room for some of this other material.
Yeah, and that's kind of the thing too, is if you teach to the test, then you only know what's on the test, right? And so if you can change the exams in some way, or if you could even look at in the early days some of like the modules and things like that, where it's not necessarily as much of a gamble for these students, or it's not necessarily as intimidating for these students to learn this stuff whenever it's not it's not you pass or fail an exam. Now it's it's on a module where you're trying to learn this stuff. I think that may be a way forward too, is you have to kind of start with what's the end goal for these people. Well, it's they want to pass actuarial exams and get a job, right? And so you have to kind of change the employer's perspective on what math is important for the job, and then that also changes the perspective about what math is important on the exams ultimately, because it kind of goes both ways with industry too, right?
Yeah,
About
well,
what's
industry.
getting put into practice, and that goes back to the other thing that we were talking about.
Yeah, I think one of the issues with industry is that when you enter industry, you tend to work for an older actuary who studied older coursework, and that's what they know.
Hmm.
And that they don't really, in my experience, they don't really want a lot of this innovative or more modern stuff. And
Yeah.
so it just perpetuates. It's been a continual disappointment to me as I see good students get to the end of their undergraduate years and go into industry. They can get a good job, they can get well paid, it's a good career, all of that, but they give up on doing research. I do a lot of work in medicine and I publish in a lot of medical journals. And one of the things I observe about doctors is that doctors are very interested in research, even when they're practicing doctors
Hmm.
will do research. I wish there were a way that we could get actuaries to do the same thing, but I've in my time as a volunteer for the SOA, 30 years of it, I've been frustrated, not been successful in encouraging that.
Well, you make it a part of the continuing actuarial education. That may change things. Make it a set of courses that's offered by the SOA as part of the CAE to go and learn more about, say, functional analysis that then leads you into risk. It doesn't necessarily have to be all this predictive analytics and AI and all of these things that are hot topics right now. I mean, I'm talking about going back to the core of important mathematics that people don't necessarily see in an actuarial degree, and then using that to push the boundary of what they're able to interpret from research. And so if you made it part of the continuing actuarial education, then maybe people are more drawn to, oh, well, I always kind of wanted to study more on partial differential equations. And here's a course now from the SOA that's taught by, somebody that's well versed in this. And that's part of my CAE for this year. And that may make a difference for people. That's another idea.
Yeah, we should look at that. I know my supervisor at Heriot Watt in Edinburgh, Angus MacDonald,
Hmm.
once commented that, he's probably the same age as me, that when we were younger actuaries were the financial mathematicians,
Hmm.
but we
Hmm.
lost that in the 1980s and 90s. We lost it by not keeping up on modern developments in financial math. And now it's all quants and people with PhDs and so on, and it's not actuaries who are leading that area. And I think there
Hmm.
are other areas where we are at risk as well of losing our leadership. Data science is one of them, I think. So it's a really difficult business. One of the things I tried to do for a while, I was on the board of the NAAJ until I joined the board of the SOA and I had to step down. Was I used to do like abstracts or summaries of articles in the
Mhm.
NAAJ to make them more appealing and more understandable to the practicing actuary community. I think they've discontinued doing that, but that was my idea to try to bring more of the research back into the practicing community.
Yeah, if you can put it on a level where people understand, okay, if I can work this stuff out and understand this math, then I'm going to have this application at the end of the day. Because that's kind of the other part of it, that industry can't see the end of the tunnel, about if you get through this difficult, learning curve, on the other side of that is applications that may change the game for people.
Yeah, so it's been frustrating. I'll say that it's been frustrating, and as somebody who's practiced both in industry and academia, it's doubly frustrating to me because I don't know how to bridge that gap. But I'll keep
Yeah.
trying. I'm going to stop us there for a moment.
Mhm.